working in the lobby was about, what it really taught me was about decoding language and about how what isn't being said is as important as what is being said, and the way. I didn't really realise I was writing a crime novel. I just thought I was writing about this courtroom drama that had been in my head. And I didn't realise that it was going to be a big deal until I had 3 big publishers kind of wanting an auction for it. So, based on true story, it's a psychological drama or thriller about power, money, lies, and family narratives, which starts with a body found on a storm-lashed North Cornwall beach. Famous children's author Dame Melanie Kingman has gathered her family and friends together to celebrate her 70th birthday party and her latest bestseller, but someone's been sending emails threatening to expose the lie she's kept for half a century. Can she discover her nemesis and preserve the fiction on which her identity and her multi-million-pound career depends?
I'm Nadine Matheson, host of The Conversation, and I know you're keen to get on with the show and watch my conversation. But before we do, I have one small request. Can you please hit the subscribe button? You might already have done so, but if you haven't, hit the subscribe button now. Takes a second, less than a second. Right, thank you very much, and let's get on with the show. Sarah Vaughan, welcome to The Conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. Right, my very first question for you, and it's a question I always like to ask now, is when did you know that you were a storyteller?
Well, when I was 10, I think I wrote stories as a little girl. I was that sort of slightly odd, bookish child, I was sort of thinking about Bronte, my mum gave me Jane Eyre at 9, which was kind of, clearly I didn't understand half of it, but, I did read that at 9. And when I was, and I can remember, I read all the Laura Ingalls Wilder books and the Roald Dahl books.
Oh, I love
and,
those.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I can remember just devouring them under the covers. And when I was 10, there was a competition called Devon Young Writer of the Year. And it was run by a Christian bookshop. But the prize was actually really, really good. This was back in 1983. And the prize was £75 in cash, £50
Really?
in book vouchers, and a trip to Hodder and Stoughton. And I wrote 2 stories, one of which was a sort of satirical sort of ab-fab type. I don't know if ab-fab was around then, but sort of, I suppose you'd call it women's fiction by a 10-year-old. And one was a mystery set in Cornwall around some standing stones in Lamorna, right to the very, very southwest of Cornwall, and sort of, a cult in the village. And I won with this. And I in those days you could get a paperback for £1. So I bought, a lot of books, and I guess that was my first. I never managed the trip to Hodder and Stoughton because they didn't pay travel expenses, and I lived in Devon, and it was just something you just didn't do. But I did buy with my 75 quid. I bought a typewriter, which was pre-computers, and a Roberts radio. And I bought, my mum made me buy a leather-bound set of Jane Austen's, and then I bought lots of Judy Blumes. So,
How old were you?
I was 10. So I wrote my first thing. But then stupidly, I was quite an academic, precocious child. And so I stopped writing stories. And in fact, I can remember really vividly thinking when I was about 13 that my imagination had gone. I guess you're going through adolescence. My parents divorced at 13. I was really bullied. And I can just remember thinking, I don't have an imagination anymore. And I just, GCSEs, A-levels, going to university, aren't you? I just sort of was in that sort of academic conveyor belt really at that stage. Yeah. And I did a lot of playing the flute, actually. So I did a lot of creative stuff in that respect. But I stopped writing stories, and I didn't start again until I was 40. So, I had a big gap.
Sarah, that is, because I'm just thinking, when you're in those teenage years, I think it's all about like your imagination in a sense, because I can just clearly imagine myself marrying pop stars who I was clearly never, ever, ever, ever going to meet. And, and you create these stories and these different versions of your life for yourself, I think, when you're in that 13, 14, 15 year old stage. And to think that you don't have an imagination
Well, I suppose for that, I suppose the book that I'd won this competition with was so sort of, it wasn't fantastical, but it was about mythical. There are these standing stones in a stone circle that they don't know, a bit like Stonehenge, and they're all over, Dartmoor and Cornwall and things. And we'd gone camping there, and I was obviously fascinated by this, and so I created this whole story about how it's a very sort of wooded, secretive. And it's on the coast, but it's South Cornwall, so it's very lush and sort of Du Maurier-esque. And I'd sort of created a whole story about the village and surrounded by the pub being like kind of, having a sort of it harnessing the magic of these stones. So I suppose I thought, I don't have imagination in that way, but you're quite right. Of course you do. You're sort of busy, fantasizing about boys, or, or as you say, pop stars or actors, or, that you might just stumble upon, but I suppose I thought my imagination wasn't as boundless as it had been as a child.
It's because I can remember, I've said it before on this podcast, I can remember at 9, I say writing my first book in quotation marks, because I'd watched The Labyrinth with David Bowie, and I was like, I loved it. Me and my brothers, we loved Labyrinth so much, and I thought, I'm gonna write my own book. I'm gonna write my version of The Labyrinth, which was basically me just rewriting The Labyrinth in prose on my dad's typewriter. But I remember just thinking, I'm a writer. I'm writing a book.
Yeah.
And you're so brave in those moments, because you just think, well, why? There's no reason why I can't do this.
No,
like, of course I can do this. And in the thing, it all changes.
Yeah, I think adolescence is brutal.
Yeah.
It knocks it out of you.
No, it does. It does. But you said you was doing other creative things at that time. But did anyone ever try and like maneuver you back towards like fiction?
I originally went to university to do music because music took over my teens. So I sort of did my grade 8 flute very early, and kind of actually sort of played semi-professionally by the time I was sort of in the sixth form. So I went to but as I was studying for my A levels, I knew that actually what I wanted to do was English, not music. So my treat for my A level revision was Men on the Cross, or which is one of my set texts, or Antony and Cleopatra, or that was the thing I really wanted to be doing. And so I actually rocked up to university and turned up to the second tutorial and said I'd written an essay on Monteverdi's Vespers. And I sat there the entire time thinking, I love playing my flute. I love playing with other people, playing the piano, singing, whatever. I do not want to do a degree. I want to do English. I really want to do English. And so I turned up to my second tutorial and said, I'm doing the wrong degree. Please, can I do English? And luckily I did coursework and I got straight A's, and the coursework was really good. So I had to be re-interviewed, but I was allowed to do English. And I then at university, I had a little student journalism. I became features editor of Charwell, which is the student paper. And, it was really clear from then that I knew that I very quickly realised that although I played my flute in 3 orchestras or whatever, I wasn't practicing. I wasn't loving that like I was the writing. And so by the end of the first year, I kind of realised that I wanted to probably be a journalist. I remember going to the careers office and looking at journalism and publishing, and it said publishing, you need to be rich and have contacts. I don't think that was the official university advice, but that was you're not going to be paid. Actually, journalism, you probably would have helped to have had contacts, and the pay was terrible to start with, and still isn't very, for what I was doing, or what I could have earned in a different sphere. So I remember thinking, it didn't occur to me I could write a novel, but I remember thinking, I think I could write for a living. I think I could be a journalist. So I quickly went off and did that. And in fact, I can remember Sadie Smith got a book deal I think she's a couple of years younger than me. And she got a book deal, I think, when she was in her last year at Cambridge or the year afterwards or something. And I remember being absolutely aghast that it just did not occur to me that a young woman could write a book, because my degree was very, very traditional. No, you didn't have to read anything after 1832. And I think I was reading a lot of, Ian McEwan and Graham Swift and all, those sort of Martin Amis and stuff like that. So I think it sounds terrible. I didn't think young women could write books. I just didn't cross all that I would be allowed to write a book.
I don't think it sounds terrible. I just think it's just a reflection of like the
time
environment of you're in. And and the times. And it always goes down to as well, like the stories that you tell yourself also, and also the other people's stories that you take on board. Because I can remember being in the careers office when I was 16, and the careers tutor said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, it's either journalism or law. I knew it was those two things, journalism or law. And she said to me, like, my reasoning was just ridiculous. She goes, well, do you want to be inside the courtroom, like making the news, or do you want to be outside in the rain waiting for the news? And it was the mere fact I didn't want to get my hair wet. So I don't want to be outside.
That's really good. Well, the early bit of my journalism, I trained at something called the Press Association, which is a news agency like Reuters. And so my traineeship was sort of, 20 months. I left early to join The Guardian, and 22 months. And the very beginning bit where, you could barely write a news story was doorstepping. And that did involve, back in the day, it did involve standing, for instance, this really dates me, outside the Harbour Club when Princess Diana was rumoured to be having an affair with Will Carling, and then outside Julia Carling's house in Putney. I know. And then Richard Branson had an aborted attempt to fly around the world in a hot air balloon or something. And I can remember in the snow being outside his house in Holland Park or wherever it was, So it was cold and wet, and I had cheap leather boots that let in the water. And, back in the day, we didn't have Gore-Tex coats or anything. I think now you'd invest in a good North Face. But, I think it was a Gap puffer that soaked right through,
Did you ever question your life choices in those moments?
I did. I befriended snappers, photographers. So photographers always would be there, and they'd have cars, so I would befriend. But yeah, it was terribly tedious to spend 12 hours on Richard Branson's doorstep.
So when you're working at the you've moved to The Guardian, and did you start straight away in politics, or did you gradually? No.
I mean, it's really tricky to do. That's quite sought after, to be a political correspondent. So no, I was there. So I did nearly a couple of years at the PA. I moved early because I was seconded to The Guardian, and Diana died in the month that I was seconded, and I did quite well then. So they kind of offered me a contract. And I started off in news. I had this ridiculous idea. What I really wanted to be doing was features. But I thought that I had to be a proper news journalist before I was allowed to write features. And then actually, once I got there, I realised that it was kind of features with a slightly closed shop, and the people who'd come straight from uni to do features were being kept on to do features, and the news reporters were seen as a sort of different species. So there wasn't that much cross-pollination. So I did, interestingly, I did a lot of court reporting because I trained at something called Westminster Press Journalism College, which was a college where they trained a lot of local reporters, and we had 2.25 hours of shorthand at first thing every morning. So I had and you had to get 100 words a minute shorthand to pass the course. I had 110. So because I'm such a girly swat. And I when I got to The Guardian, a lot of people didn't have shorthand, and so for court reporting, obviously you couldn't take I think you can now record, but you couldn't then record anything.
No, you still can't record.
You still can't. Okay.
No.
So you had to be good at shorthand to do well. So I did quite early on. I did at PA. I did the opening of the inquest into the Stephen Lawrence inquiry that then became and I was the only reporter there because they didn't think it was a story. And then suddenly I filed at 11 o'clock, and the Mail came down, the Times and the Telegraph, and the Mail splashed on it, and they used lots of my copy because I was the only person there. That was my first taste of how dramatic a court could be. And then so I did quite a lot of court reporting at The Guardian because lots of people didn't have that shorthand.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of the stories were, I did the case of a woman called Angela Canning. So actually on appeal, her conviction was lifted, but she was convicted for shaking baby death in Winchester. I did a few horrible paedophile cases. I did the disappearance of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. Also, but by this stage, I was in my 20s. I was, look quite, I suppose, quite pretty or unthreatening. And so I was sent, and I think I was perceived as quite empathetic. And so I was sent to do the stories where there was a dead child, where I wouldn't antagonize the parents, and I could look quite sympathetic and empathetic and get people to, non-threatening. So I did the disappearance of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman at Soham and the trial. And before that, I did the abduction and the murder trial of the abduction of Sarah Payne in West Sussex. Do you remember? And there was a guy called Roy Whiting. who kind of had a previous, and I covered his trial at Lewis Crown Court. So I had lots of experience of violence against women and girls in court cases. That was, I was never sort of called a paedophile correspondent, but that was effectively what it felt like. And I can remember doing Soham, and it was this weird atmosphere because we were at the school where Ian Huntley, who's now just died, isn't he?
Yeah.
Was a caretaker. So he was kind of circling press conferences. We had lots of interaction with him. I kind of, doing my empathetic bit, touched his arm once to sort of say, I think I got a bit irritated with him because he was a real stickler for closing the school at 3:30 because those were his hours. And back in the day, you couldn't get mobile phone signal. I had like a Nokia brick that I would plug into my laptop, and it was only really in the school hall that you got reception to file your copy. And I tried sort of arguing, but don't we want to find these girls? Don't you want us to file the copy? And then he got a bit arsey. This is towards the point at which Brian Farmer, the PA journalist, was going to sort of say, actually, he's a bit dodge. But yeah, so we were sort of engaging with him, and I went to his arraignment at Peterborough Crown Court where people were kind of throwing eggs, and I'd already done a background or a couple of other paedophiles for stories I'd done, and I just had this really acute feeling that I did not want to sit through his trial. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go to Grimsby and find out about these 14-year-old girls that he was. I think he was he charged with rape? I don't think the case was ever brought, was it? But although he was questioned about rape of 14-year-old girls, or a girl. And I knew I didn't want to uncover all that, and I knew I did not want to sit through a trial detailing everything that. Well, actually, the bodies were burnt, so but I just did not want to sit through all of that again. And a colleague of mine I'd already done a maternity leave in the lobby for a colleague of mine, and had loved it. I think it actually coincided with Peter Mandelson having to resign over one of his resignations, and
so
then
many.
She was having a second baby, and so the job came up as a permanent job. So I applied for it, partly because I'd loved it, but also partly because I knew that I just did not want to I was coming up for 30. I didn't want to keep covering stories about violence against women and girls, which is ironic because then I wrote about me in this scandal. But I think enough time had elapsed, and it's not about children. I mean, I couldn't write about killed children.
Because but being in criminal law, and I lost count of the amount of times people would ask me, like, well, how can you do it? Like, how can you work in criminal law? Because I said you can work on the most ludicrous kind of case, which always said reduced down to someone stealing meat out the supermarket, to the most serious, which is the murders and the rapes and things like that. And I always say, well, I've never taken it on emotionally, and because if I did, I wouldn't have been able to. I wouldn't have lasted a month, let alone been in it for like decades now. So, but when you were in that early stage of your career, do you think it's the motivation of you want to get the most experience you can and just become really, really good at your job, that kind of puts a brick wall between the emotions?
Yeah, I think it must be like doing police or law, or my husband's a doctor. You're a professional. There was probably a competitive element. There was a fearful element. I had to file copy, so I was in a pack with a lot of men, probably young men, I guess, and you just want to be as good. You want your copy to be just as good as if I was writing the Guardian splash on the Guardian page 3, it had to be at least as good as the guy on the Times, or you kind of that you're trying to please your news desk. I suppose you want that professional satisfaction as well as the dopamine high. I think when you're immersed in it, you're aware of the humanity of it. You're aware they're little girls who've gone missing, but you tell yourself, I suppose, in those instances, I'm doing a job, I'm getting the story out there so that people are still, because their bodies weren't found for 11, 12 days, were they? So I think
it was a while.
in fact, 30, they disappeared on the Sunday. He was arrested a week on Friday, and the bodies were found on the Saturday, so nearly a fortnight later. So, there was the story began to not tail off because it became a great big circus, but you felt this imperative to keep, there was a sort of, perhaps have they been abducted somewhere? Could they still be alive? You know, you were still, I suppose, telling yourself you were trying to help with that. And I don't know how much longer it would have continued, you know, to be able to tell yourself that. But I suppose you're thinking, I hadn't had children by then. And I think that I don't think I could do those jobs having had children. I think news reporting is quite a young person's game. And I don't think there were any mothers. I mean, there may have been fathers on that story, but I don't think there were any mothers that I remember.
I think it takes a different sort of energy, even when you are like a very junior, like I say, newly qualified.
Yeah, the stamina.
In my case, it is stamina. When I think about being in police stations as a trainee, paralegal and trainees at all hours of the morning and the weekend, and then when you are qualified, and there is that strong sense. I don't think we probably don't even talk about it enough. It's that competition that's there, because you want to be seen as just as good as the men or anyone else, I say, in your arena. So that drives you a lot as well.
Yeah.
But you have a different sort of stamina, because the time the time I stopped, so that would have been 2019, was the last time I was in court. So I'm trying to think how old I was. That was 7 years ago. So I was 42. Like I do not have the energy to be dragging my suitcase up and down.
No, Paris is going on. No, I completely get that. I was just thinking about my student daughter, who yesterday did a 4-hour exam. Then we packed up a room, and then she got at 4:30 this morning. She travelled to Gatwick she's just landed in Austria. So, you know, I was like, I could not even contend of doing that at the end of a university year. But but I just think that actually she is more resilient, because she's, you know, she's young, she's a student.
She's young, yeah.
You know, But I'm 53, and I definitely couldn't be doing that. But yeah, I think there's that resilience, and there's, you know, I didn't have children, so you know, you could do very long hours. You could go and stay away. You know, you could, the competition, the fear, I guess, of, you know, needing to be as good and proving yourself to be as good as everybody else. And I think the adrenaline, I think the dopamine hit of getting the bylines each day, and the chasing of that high of knowing you've done something really good, and that validation each day. And, you know, it's not like writing a novel. It's like you get your instant hit, and then you're and you're probably,
the adrenaline's different.
Yeah. And when you're in the lobby, and which I moved on to do, and if every sort of fourth Sunday I would be on call, and occasionally, once I wrote 6 stories for that day, and I wrote this, you know, there's a big story, and you just have to write really fast, and it is a brilliant, it's a thrill, it's a rush to, you know, to be able to achieve that, to write how many, you know, 3,000 words really quickly at the end of the day. If you've got to, I mean, it didn't happen very often at all, but to be able to know that you were capable of condensing all the information you'd received, and, you know, that my introduction to that, I guess, was, as I said, I did a month at the Guardian on a sort of secondment from PA, while one of the Guardian's trainees came to PA, and it was and on the last Sunday, Diana died in the early hours of the morning in Paris, and all their star reporters I think it was an August bank holiday weekend. And they were all, you know, at weddings or off boats off Scotland, or, you know, just away. So I had to come in and do it. I'd been clubbing the night before with my sister, so I had a terrible hangover. And I think I was 23, and 22, and 23, and I went in, and at 5:30 I hadn't written anything, and the managing and the deputy editor came up to me and said, you know, you've got to start writing something, you know. We're off stage at 6:30, and I went and gave myself a pep talk in the news. You know, I talked to myself in a mirror and said, you know, stop being scared, just, you know, that procrastination, it's got to be the perfect drop in for just it. And I went back, and I think I wrote 2,500 words in an hour or something really quickly, and it was just a sort of, I mean, unfortunately I'm not able to do that with my novels, but it was a real that was a real example of getting a rush from, you know, doing a job quickly and doing it well, and thinking, gosh, I can condense. It's a bit like if you look back at your uni essays, you think, oh, it's quite intelligent then. It was this person who could do that. I can't do that now. So I think youth and competition, and you know, thriving on adrenaline, and, you know, the capacity and the excitement, I suppose. You know, I was living in London. You know, what I loved about journalism was news journalism. Every day you were being sent off to a different store. You didn't know what you were going to do. You didn't know if you were going to be sent to a Cambridgeshire village for 10 days, or you didn't know what was going to happen. So now I would hate that. But at the time, I loved that, that spontaneity and that variation.
Yeah.
I hated having a day in the office.
Oh no, I didn't used to mind a day in the office, but only after if I'd been on a trial and I feel like I've been in court forever. I'm like, I just wanted that. I just need to be still, just to like recalibrate, and then I can start again. But I just got me thinking about adrenaline, because I think I got adrenaline in different ways. I'd get adrenaline if I'd done like a really good closing speech to a jury, because then you can because you're always watching them. And you can see the wheels turn, and you're like, oh, I've got them. So you'd get even if they came back and said guilty, you're like, oh, well. But in those moments, you get the adrenaline in those moments. And also, I'd get it in a weird way. Because I always say to the baby lawyers and trainees when I'm teaching them is that when you get a case, a lot of the work is getting rid of the noise and getting down to the core of it. And I used to get an adrenaline rush, like establishing what is the story here, and kind of working it out from this big bundle of papers. Sarah, can I ask you a craft question? When you was writing, was there a difference, or did you find you had to adjust the way you wrote in comparison to in comparing when you was doing the court reporting? So when you are doing the doorstep and being amongst these families, in comparison to when you are now in Parliament in Westminster?
Well, I suppose a lot of working in the lobby was about, what it really taught me was about decoding language and about how what isn't being said is as important as what is being said, and the way in which something is being said. No comment might basically mean a confirmation, but they don't want to be on the record as saying that, and so it's more about sleights of hand, and it's more intrinsic, it's more nuanced, I guess. I'm obviously fascinated by power and class and social mobility and abuse of power. And obviously you see abuse of power in, murders of children, but you also see abuse of power in Parliament sort of playing out, it's almost Shakespearean sometimes. And so I think that I became a lot more alert, and I had to become more sophisticated in writing as a political correspondent than, if you're in a court case, you are, both areas, you are searching out what's the top line, what's the story here.
Yeah.
So if you're on a press bench in a court and you're listening to an opening speech, your top line is probably quite clear, because your prosecutor's like handing it to you, and so you'll have lots of journalists turning up to the first day of a big trial and then going away for a bit, But then other stories might be, in cross-examination, if somebody kind of admits something or gives a very visceral description of the impact of something, that might be your top line there, But if you're in the lobby, you might be looking at, say the Mandelson stuff, the top line didn't become, he asked for 500,000 and got 75 or 70 million in a payoff or whatever. The top line became, what's Keir Starmer's judgment that he thought that was a good idea to give somebody who'd sacked, that. So you've just got to, it's not the immediate top line, the headline grabbing, oh my God, Lord Mandelson asked for, is he Lord now? He asked for 500,000 when he was sacked, but, being pals with a convicted paedophile. The story became, why on earth is our Prime Minister giving a severance, which of course is a legal thing, isn't it? A sort of employment, process type thing, a fear of being sued at tribunals. I've just been listening to the Political Currency podcast where George Osborne was saying, he's not going to court. That absolutely gave out the wrong message, that actually they should have risked it. But, Keir Starmer didn't want to do that or whatever. So the story becomes about the PM's judgment, not just about the pay. So that will have been kind of, I imagine the lobby will all have kind of slightly hunted us pack in that and decided that was the line, because they all came up with that line. There wasn't somebody saying, oh, the top line is he asked for 500,000. So it's more about, I think there's more nuance probably in political reporting than just, being a real genius. And I don't think doorstepping happens in the same way now. But probably just on the tabs, but standing to shout at Julia Carling, is your husband having an affair with Lady Princess Di? which clearly she's not going to. So all you got from that was, Mrs. Carling refused to comment. Or, I mean, I can't remember. I do remember being quite ashamed going and covering that. But, yeah, so it's a different style, very different style of reporting. And it's a different style of reporting from being a good court reporter, where you're taking down reams and reams of quotes in the story, and then you're very quickly filleting it and processing it and working out what the top line is from that. It's different, very different journalism. I think a lot of political journalism is nods and winks and hunches, but backed up by not just hunches, but backed up by various different sources.
It's there, yeah.
It's colour and it's nuance and it's psychology and personality and and character, isn't it? Whereas standing on a doorstep is just reporting a fact or making it a fact.
So when you start, so I just find it so fascinating, all of this. But so when you started writing at 40, and now you're writing again creatively, do you have to then make another adjustment to how?
Yeah, well, I think it's so interesting. So I took voluntary redundancy from The Guardian when I was 35 because I had a really problematic second pregnancy. I couldn't walk in my second pregnancy, and I intended to go back. I'd taken a year off, and when I was 11 months old, when my second child was 11 months old, I had an MRI scan because I was still in really chronic pain. I had really chronic pain, and I was sort of taking a cocktail of drugs until he was 3. And I went to see a pain consultant. I did have private health insurance with The Guardian, and she said, "You were absolutely." She was a woman, but she said, "You are absolutely ridiculous if you think you can commute up to London." We'd moved outside London by this stage for my husband's job. And he was a junior doctor going around lots of different hospitals, and because that's what the training process is. And she said, if you think you can commute up to London with 2 small children, a husband who's who's working at weekends and shifts and isn't really there, and a back problem, you are going to be flat on your back within a week of commuting up to London. And they weren't paying me enough I would have needed to have done the job. I would have needed to have had a live-in nanny, which I didn't have a big enough house for, plus the commute up to London. I wasn't earning anything like that. The childcare would have eaten up all the cost, even if they were both of them at nursery and it almost gave me permission to just say, my body cannot take this. I cannot commute, have 2 small children, be in chronic pain the entire time and hold down a job. I tried to in maternity leave. I collapsed in the street when I was pregnant with him, and I'd gone back to The Guardian and at 26 weeks, and I was in so much pain that I got sent home again. So it was kind of like I'd always thought of it, bar a year after uni when I kind of wiped tables and done a lot of work experience and then done my journalism course. I'd always excelled. I got my straight A's. I'd gone to Oxford. I'd gone, traineeship. I'd gone to The Guardian for 11 years. I hadn't stopped. I had never had a gap year.
There's no break.
I
never had a gap year either.
No, exactly.
I wish I had.
Us high achieving girls, we just didn't do that, did we? In the 90s. So I had, and it was a moment where the easiest thing, and it gave me permission to say, okay, I'm going to take voluntary redundancy. That's going to allow me to look after my kids. I did have a house, and I stopped, although I was listening still avidly to the news, I stopped obviously writing news stories, and I started freelancing, but freelancing writing features. And I found it really demoralizing because I kept being told that stories were not stories when I knew by much younger employees than me, who were like 23 and I was like 35, I'm 37, I'm telling you this is a story. And I was also I ended up writing lots of pieces for Mother and Baby magazine, at which stage also Erin Kelly had a column. So obviously, it's a Mother and Baby magazine. I kept doing these news reports, and they kept being edited so badly that the editor would put in things like, I wrote a big report on breastfeeding, and I did things like I spoke to Tony Blair's specialist professor at St George's, and it had been quite difficult to get his contact details, and he'd given me a lot of time, and I'd kind of put in some quite earnest quotes. And they chopped it all out, and they quoted some fictitious 17-year-old from Middlesbrough or something, saying, I don't want anyone sucking on my fun bags. And I was like, I haven't quoted anyone saying I don't want me sucking on my fun bag. I mean, what an awful way to talk about your breasts. But
terrible. I've only just met you, and I'm like, that is so not Sarah.
I mean, can you imagine? So I'd spoken to some professor of, neonatology or something at St George's Hospital that Blair had used to, and it had all fed into the decision to allow women to have, mothers to have 9 months maternity leave. You know, it was the breastfeeding sort of data. And, you know, so it's probably a bit earnest, Mother and Baby magazine, but it did not deserve to be excised so that, you know, Stacey from Middlesbrough, wherever she was from, could tell me about her handbags. And I'm sure to this day, this character was made up, you know, that they didn't interview somebody taking this. Anyway, as a result of that, I thought, I'm really fed up hawking myself around writing pieces like this. I actually do have an idea for a book. And I think it was something about stopping and doing lots of it. I did a lot of baking with my toddler son and reading children's stories and just taking a step back, you know, not having that drive of writing, you know, 600-page word leads, or, you know, just being on it and having to think of the top line all the time. I think for the first time since I'd written that, you know, creative writing award book when I was 10, I kind of, my imagination came back a bit, you know, which was lovely, doing these really creative, you know, painting with my kids.
You've got no restrictions on you.
No
There's
restrictions.
Just the freedom.
And I had this idea. I mean, my first 2 books have not bothered any bestseller lists. Oh, actually, the second one has in France, but the first one didn't. But my first book is set around a fictitious baking competition inspired by a sort of 1960s Mary Berry style cookbook called The Art of Baking. And it's about why we bake and the impossibility of perfection and motherhood, really. But it was inspired by seeing cake sales at the school gate and the amount of care that, you know, I turned up at my first reception cake scale with, where's it? Sent me balloons.
Oh, I don't know. It's got balloons.
Oh, maybe I'm talking too much. I'd made little cupcakes with my, you know, I don't know what they were, 6 and 4-year-olds, 3 and 5-year-olds, and they decorated them with icing and sparkles, and they looked terrible because they were decorated by 6 and 3-year-olds. And I turned up at this cake sale, and they were these amazing, you know, this was sort of 2012, you know, things with sort of whipped buttercream and sparkles and, you know, like, you know, these sort of complete sugar high things. And I looked at these women who had obviously spent hours concocting these cakes. And I thought and they'd had really high powered jobs, and now they were being mums. And I just thought, oh gosh, there's a lot of competition here. You know, there's a lot of fulfillment here. What are these women doing? Why are we all putting so much effort into these cupcakes? And the book, that's my debut evolved from there. So that's, sorry, long story short, by baking with my son and having that time out, I was able to start to think in a more creative way. And I'd been writing it for, I don't know, 2 months, 3 months, and I turned 40 and I stood up. Someone said, what are you going to do in this decade? And I stood up and I had drunk too much Prosecco. I ate some friends and some girlfriends, and I just said, I'm going to write a book and get it published within a year. I mean, I don't know why I thought that. And I did. Well, 13 months. We got a preempt 13 months later. So my birth is in September, and then just before Frankfurt the following year, we got the preempt.
I was going to say, and I was listening to you, especially when you was talking about, you know, being in so much pain and collapsing in the street, and then still going, effectively, like, you're still going to do your job. And I can remember, like, we do so much through when our bodies are telling us no. Because I had endometriosis and fibroids, and I remember I collapsed at the tube station from the pain on a Friday night. I was in the hospital Friday night, released at silly o'clock in the morning, Saturday morning. I can't walk. I'm in so much pain, in bed the whole weekend. And I had a trial at the Bailey starting on the Monday. And I still dragged myself to the Bailey, when really I should have just said, listen, you're going to have to find someone else to do this trial because I am not physically capable of doing it. But I still literally dragged myself to the Bailey, and I did this week-long trial. I think it was a robbery trial. And I was in pain. But you tell yourself all kinds of crazy stories.
But it was for you, it was a trial at the Bailey. You didn't want to it was your trial. You've done all the work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's also something specific about women, anything that's related to female health, so endometriosis. You wouldn't have wanted to, and me, pregnancy, collapsing in the street when I was pregnant, you know, it kind of was inconvenient for everybody basically that was pregnant, because I wasn't going off and doing, you know, having children. I think, I mean, hopefully it's changed a bit, but I think that employment laws were broken along, you know, I mean, I think
definitely.
that 20 years ago, you know, it wasn't ideal to have your young reporters or your political correspondents going off and having babies, really, you know. So I think we also, as women, we accept pain. We accept pain as part of the female state, don't we? I mean, I had a rant about this with somebody the other day. You know, like you have coils or smears or things inserted without any pain relief. You know, childbirth. You know, I remember asking for an elective cesarean with my son because I couldn't walk, and I was told no. You know, I just had to get on with having it.
Just get on with it.
You know, we just accept pain. You know, in a way that men don't. You know,
never.
And I think it's and you know, I think that about perimenopause as well. You know, the kind of, if this was happening to men, I think society would be a lot kinder. But I mean, I'm sure there is that is you that I mean, that's quite a horrifying story, you having to take yourself to the Bailey. But you know, you prepared it. It was your trial. It's big.
You don't want to let people down.
Don't want to let people down. Someone else would have to do it. You didn't want, and you know, you would be letting down. There would have had to have been a bit of disruption, wouldn't there? Lose some time in court. You know, the cost of that. You probably would have been conscious of all of that.
Yeah,
and your clients, and you know,
so many things. And you just can't. I think the most self-care I did that day, because I had an appointment. I remember I had an appointment in the afternoon, and I gave the judge a note via the clerk, by saying, "Look, I was in hospital this weekend. I need to leave early." And the judge, he was very good. My judge was very good. And he's like, "No, of course, of." But
you were still standing up on your feet.
I was still standing. Yeah, I should definitely not have been on my feet. Oh my God. So Sarah, when we get to the point of anatomy of a scandal, I don't think you can ever be prepared for success. But what happened?
I wasn't prepared. So I'd written 2 books, women's fiction books for the reading group market. The first of which was about this baking competition. It's called The Art of Baking Blind. And I then actually had the idea for anatomy, and I was told you can't move from writing a book about baking to one about consent. You just can't do it. The readers aren't going to be able to cope with that. So I wrote a time-slip story about sort of love, loss, and redemption, set in, actually relevant to, based on a true story, set in the very far west, well, in fact, in North Cornwall, with a story in the Second World War, and it's about motherhood as well, and secrets. And that was my difficult second novel, because I had no idea how I was writing my first novel, and then with the second novel, I had to sort of kind of learn how to write a novel.
Yeah.
And then I'd written them both for Hodder, and the editor who had bought both books in a preempt had actually left before the first one became a paperback. And my second difficult novel, I think I had 3 different editors over a very short period. And, you know, it didn't do well in the UK. So I wanted to, but it became a big bestseller in France. So it was marketed very differently. And it's still the book in France that I get messages and Instagram posts about. It's sold over 250,000 copies in France. And so it's done really well in France. So that gave me enough of a boost to think, okay, it's not that I'm a really terrible writer. It's that something about the way in which it was published, you know, or the time it was published or whatever, just didn't resonate over here. So it gave me enough self-belief as well to think, there's this story that I thought about, that I've had percolating for 2 years, which I wanted to write while I've been writing the farm book. And it's about, you know, a Tory MP accused of raping and actually sexual thing. We had an affair in a lift in the House of Commons. He's going to stand trial, and I knew, obviously, the barrister was going. And this is the story I want to write. And so I wrote it out of contract. I wrote it really fast. I didn't have any money, or you know, I didn't know that it was going to be published. So I didn't want to spend years crafting
working on it.
So I wrote it in 9 months.
That's really quick.
Well, I've never managed to achieve it since then. And it also coincided with the run up to the 2016 EU referendum.
Yeah.
And I voted Remain, and I was really angry with all these entitled politicians. So, for instance, the morning after the referendum, when Farage sat on the Good Morning Britain sofa and talked about their 350 million on the side of bus being an aspiration, not a promise, I went straight back and I wrote the scene in which James and the Libertines smash up the restaurant. And actually, Lisa Jules sent me a message saying, that read as if you were really angry when you were writing it. And I was, because I was so angry with Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson that I just wrote the scene really, really fast. Sorry. So basically, I wrote anatomy. It sounds really stupid. I mean, it sounds incredibly stupid. I didn't really realise I was writing a crime novel. I just thought I was writing about this courtroom drama that I'd had been in my head. And I didn't realise that it was going to be a big deal until I had 3 big publishers kind of bidding at auction for it. Or actually kind of giving their best offers and, kind of that whole process. And even when it, I sold it in the October of 2016 and it published in the January 2018. So a long lead time, and I was getting great quotes. And I mean, you can see a similar thing happening with Dissection of a Murder at the moment, that whole sort of process. And it was only when I was going around signing stock in Oxford, and I got taken out for lunch by the S&S rep so this was in January 2018, literally like 2 days before publication. And the rep said to me, "You do realise that they think this is going to be a big deal, don't you? You do realise they think that this is going to be a bestseller?" I had no idea. But I mean, I hadn't had a bestseller before. Why was I going to have a bestseller this time? It just didn't. I was just like, oh, this is quite nice. And you asked a question about, what would I tell myself about the writing process? And it was just to enjoy those, to enjoy the fact it's not normal to get a taxi with your book on the side of it, just revel in that, because probably won't ever happen again in your career. And that's fine because it's happened once. But, just enjoy all of that. So no, I did not realize the success that would happen. It was incredible until literally a couple of days before.
But I think, when you tell your story about how writing and that myth of a scandal came to be, I just think it just shows the importance of just having confidence in the story that you want to tell, not being distracted by what's going on around you. Because I think London Book Fair was last week as we record this. And, everyone's seen all the release, all the press releases, all the book announcements. And I think writers let's say they're out there, they're submitting to agents or they're waiting for responses from editors. They could think, oh my God, I'm writing the wrong kind of story. I should be writing something else. And really, you just write the story that you want to write, because you did. And there's no restrictions on you. No one's asking for it, which I always think is it's always a bonus, because it gives you more freedom to do what you want to do and tell the story that you want to tell. And then that happened. Because I think I read it I did a creative writing masters, and I'm pretty sure I remember sitting in the garden reading it over the summer. And I find it so interesting, because you're not the only author I've spoken to who have said they didn't realise they're writing a crime novel, because that's not your focus. Do you know what I mean? It's just a story. Yeah.
It was very weird to suddenly I remember in March, in fact, it was the day that the Westminster stabbings happened, there was an S&S crime showcase that I was asked to come along to. And it was slightly muted because obviously this awful stabbings had just happened on Westminster Bridge. But I just remember finding it bizarre that I was with these people who were writing about serial killers. Because I didn't think I was writing that. So I thought I was, but I mean, of course it comes under crime, and the courtroom drama, it's a psychological thriller. So it's kind of all elements of it, of all of those threes. But I don't think my books kind of come neatly into one genre, really. They're kind of, based on true story doesn't either. So it was amazing. And then actually, so it published in the January, and then in the February half term, I was the Spanish publishers were really enamored with it, and they were publishing it in Catalan and Spanish. And so they flew me out to Madrid and then Barcelona. And then I went to Barcelona to do lots and lots of press, which was amazing. And at the same time, I was then having different calls, this was pre-Zoom, with different sets of producers, 3 different sets of producers who wanted to auction it. And that was completely surreal. And again, there was a sort of bidding process. And I took my son, my family flew out to join me for the Barcelona bit, and we went round the I wouldn't say Real, not Real, Madrid, whatever the new camp is called in Barcelona, the Barcelona training camp.
Yeah.
And I was distracted because I was kind of getting these emails about sums of money and deadlines. And I'd had a period where I wasn't really earning anything because I was like eking out my redundancy.
Yeah.
And I was earning not very much. In fact, Mother and Baby paid quite well, but the Guardian tried to pay me under NUJ rates, remember? And that you weren't getting very much at all for freelance journalism. And I hadn't bought any new clothes for 6 years. You know, I remember that sort of period, that early period. And so the kids had come, but obviously I'd had anatomy, and the kids had come out. And normally, you know, I don't spoil my children, so I was going to buy my son a pencil from the shop. And then I got this email that came through, and I bought him a Barcelona football training jacket.
Not even just the shirt. You went for the jacket.
No, he got the jacket. And he was quite olive skinned, and he was wearing it with Barca on the back. And of course, everybody thought he was a little Spanish boy. You know? But that was the indication that, mum's happy. She's bought him a Barca like zipper. You know, he wore it for years. Yeah. So that was all very exciting. Yeah. So then I realized with that, but then you still don't with their TV option. I think only like 1 in 12 auctions ever get made or something, you know. So you know, I didn't know that would happen.
Did you experience second book syndrome again? Like after writing anatomy? Because it's so big. Anatomy was so big. And then is Reputation the next? I read Reputation, it's the next one.
And then Reputation's the next one. So I think I do really well on odd number books because of the start of a deal. And then the even number book I find much harder. Yeah. So I did, yes. So how do you follow up anatomy? I think in hindsight, I should have done I probably should have done a Reputation, another courtroom drama after anatomy.
Yeah.
I mean, the link was that I wanted to write about another. I loved creating Kate Woodcroft. So I loved creating a woman who was really interesting, professional woman who I would have liked to have known in real life, you know, who wasn't working. I wasn't writing a book in a domestic setting. I was seeing somebody in a work environment.
Yeah.
And I wanted to write about another really interesting, powerful, flawed woman. And my husband's a doctor, and I toyed with the idea of a surgeon, but then Jane Shemmelt's written a book called Daughter, where a surgeon makes a mistake. And I think there have been subsequent ones since then. But at the time, you know, simply don't have to kill a child and operated it. But there's an element of that. So I thought, well, I can't go down that route. But I made my main character a paediatrician who has to make a sort of judgment call about a safeguarding issue. So that was my sort of, here's another woman in a who makes a judgment call that has massive impact in the same way that Kate does by taking on the case. So that was my sort of way of complementing it. But I think probably in hindsight, I should have thought, okay, this did write rather well. I'm going to write another courtroom drama. Done rape, I'll do murder now. You know, I think I should have just thought it, because actually Reputation is, the Times says it's a better written book than, and my dad says it's a better crafted book than Anatomy. And I think it is. I think it's a really strong book. Unfortunately, it came out a week after Russia invaded Ukraine. So all the publicity, you know, do you remember when the prices food prices went up? So people in supermarkets were suddenly seeing that, you know, they were not going to be buying books because they suddenly saw that their cost of bread. Do you remember bread and pasta and everything went up from that point? And fuel and everything. And then it came out in paperback the week that Liz Truss mucked up the economy. And so it's about, Reputation is about a female MP. And I think and it's about stalking and horror and trolling and navigating away in public life. And it's quite dark. And I think that everybody writing, but, you know, it was 22, we were still sort of feeling the impact of the pandemic quite a lot, I think. And then Ukraine. Yeah. And so I think, you know, for whatever reason, I think that Reputation,
just the wrong time.
If I'd written it after Anatomy, I think it would have done better. But anyway, I didn't.
Yeah.
And The Little Disasters has done well, so that's fine. Even though that was my lockdown book that was, you know, 10 days after the first lockdown it was published. So, and then it was the Waterstones Thriller of the Month in the third lockdown. So it was, you know, people couldn't go and buy books then. So yeah, I think the whole political and social cultural climate, the pandemic and the various different wars have really impacted on books, haven't they? Sorry, that's a big ramble, but you know, if I was being strategic about it, I probably should have thought, I'll do another courtroom drama. Yeah. But I didn't. But, you know, I'm really proud of Little Disasters, but it was a far more difficult book to write because also Anatomy, I had such a strong, clear, driving sense of what the story was, you know, and the nature of a court case gave it a sort of certain scaffolding.
Yeah.
Which obviously I have a Reputation as well, because you're going to have some of the evidence and you're going to have these key moments of, you know, starting the prosecution, doing the defence, the twists and turns of the evidence, and then the verdict. And so you've got this structure with the courtroom drama of that, enables you to sort of be almost a scaffolding on which to hang your book.
Naturally gives you, because so when I'm teaching and I'm teaching lawyers how to do their speeches, even I had to cross-examine. I said, you're always following that 3-act story structure.
Yeah,
it's there within all parts of a case. So when you're writing a book and you are writing those courtroom dramas, that storytelling techniques, they are there.
No, I was going to say a barrister is very much telling a story. I remember when to write Anatomy and Reputation, I shadowed the same. She's now a KC, amazing woman. And I remember her just telling me, this is, you see that with sort of Imran Mahmood's stories or the Secret Barristers recent one.
It's all storytelling.
It's all storytelling, and it's which story is the most persuasive.
Yeah, always. You could have sat in with me last week.
Oh, maybe I should have a career change.
It's like, how persuasive can you be? Which story is your audience, whether your tribunal, which story are they going to believe? So before I ask you about based on a true story, because I need to ask you about based on a true story.
About 5 minutes left. Literally.
I need to ask you. What did your whole publishing journey taught you about yourself?
Oh,
gosh. Publishing your writing journey, I would say.
My writing journey. Yeah. I think it probably taught me that I'm more resilient than I thought. Because, it is quite... it is. So what I'm now writing, well, I had one book that I had to sort of put aside because it wasn't right for the time, which was another political book. So I'm now sort of on my 8th one. And I am not, unfortunately, somebody who can write a book in a year. I really wish I was.
Yeah.
But I am still plodding on. And, I do have to think, well, if I'm whatever you call it, a mid-career, is that what you call it now? Novelist, I have managed to earn a living by writing from the age of 22. So I have, from that first going to that PA newsroom, I think I just turned 23 actually. I've earned a living all the way through from writing. So, I've adapted. So I did journalism when I really wanted to write a novel, but I had no idea how to do it or that I'd be allowed to do it. So then I started writing, I wrote women's fiction because I knew very clearly that I needed to earn some money. And so I wrote something deliberately quite commercial, but it's got a literary element to it. But, I knew something that I would be picked up. It was, inspired by the Great British Bake Off back in 2012. And then I didn't realise I was pivoting to crime, but I did.
But you did.
And then now I have recognised that actually, although I'm really proud of, Reputation, for instance, the market has changed and people's sensibilities have changed, I think, given the huge trauma in the world at the moment. So I've slightly pivoted, and if we can segue into based on a true story,
we can.
I have more of a sort of a bit more of a Christie for the Instagram age, a bit more of a sort of closed room metaphorical closed room murder mystery that can be solved, in a lush setting. So it's slightly more escapist and slightly more indulgent, I guess, in that respect, and slightly less dark. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think it's cozy, but yeah.
I was going to ask you, would you like to tell the listeners? I'm going to hold it up. Would you like to tell the listeners about based on a true story? I love this.
I do my elevator pitch now. I've been practicing.
Yes, the elevator pitch. And I've got 2 questions to ask you, and then we'll ask you the final set of questions, and then say goodbye.
Okay. So, based on true story, it's a psychological drama thriller about power, money, lies, and family narratives, which starts with a body found on a storm-lashed North Cornwall beach. Famous children's author Dame Eleanor Kingman has gathered her family and friends together to celebrate her 70th birthday party and her latest bestseller. But someone's been sending emails threatening to expose the lie she's kept for half a century. She's got a TV crew arriving to film a retrospective of her life. Can she discover her nemesis and preserve the fiction on which her identity and her multi-million-pound career depends? So that's my pitch for it. And it's kind of a feminized King Lear as well. And you've got a whole cast of characters like Dame Eleanor Kingman, obviously, and she's got her 3 daughters. She's got a past agent, a current agent. She's got, the illustrator who's illustrating her children's books. And then you've got all these people coming out of the woodwork who I won't tell you about because that will spoil it. And you've got the sort of the TV crew kind of capturing it all.
Okay, so Sarah, what was the biggest challenge when writing based on a true story?
Oh gosh, I suppose keeping all the different narrative threads going, because there's a subplot including sort of a loan shark and online gambling, and you're just trying to balance the voices and maintain. I think the pace. I think I've learned a lot about pace actually through. I'm an executive producer on my TV shows, so I've given notes on lots of different versions of the scripts, and then for Little Disasters, the actual rushes and the edits of the show. And I've learned so much about story structuring through that. And in fact, when I wrote Reputation, I was giving notes on the anatomy scripts, and the same team have bought it who did anatomy, and they said, we can see that you've really learned from watching anatomy being made, which I had. I learned so much about pace and structure and suspense and telegenic settings and I've always written, even my debut have like 6 points of view. I didn't really realize that you weren't meant to do that with your debut. So I've always written from multiple points of view, which is good for TV as well. So I've been okay about all of that, but I think balancing the different points of view and maintaining the suspense and not getting bogged down in one particular bit and remembering that another strand has to come along, I suppose, is the structure I find the hardest thing. I think that was probably the most difficult bit.
Okay. If you could spend an afternoon with any of your characters, whom would you choose and why?
Oh, it'd be Kate Woodcroft in Anatomy of Scandal. My bestie. Not really. She's I got asked that recently on another podcast. I mean, I love her because she changed my life, because she was a way of writing a really interesting woman, and she obviously opened up, amazing things for me. But she's really flawed, and I think it's quite easy to think you have to write likable, or at least you don't have to write likable characters. You have to write understandable characters. People, that you can understand their motivation. And I do think I hope she's likable and sympathetic, but she is clearly flawed as well. And I just love that. I think she's interesting, and there's some narcissistic. There's a lot of me in her as well. So I would like her, wouldn't I?
Yeah, of course. I don't think it sounds narcissistic at all. Okay, so Sarah, are you an introvert or extrovert, or a hybrid of the two?
Do you know, I actually did a psychology quiz to help me with this. I said that I'm somewhat extroverted, which was interesting because I think I am more extroverted than the cliche of a writer is that you're sitting on your own, in your room, kind of. And actually, I hate that. And what someone asked me last week, when career fulfillment wise, where I said actually the thing I really miss is being in the lobby, the room in the lobby with all the other young journalists, because we were bouncing ideas off each other. And what I've loved about giving notes on scripts, and I've started to write a script, is the collaborative nature of it. The sort of being in meetings where you're kind of getting other people's ideas, bouncing back and saying, oh, I could do that, So I think I am more of an extrovert. And my niece also, I remember when she did psychology GCSE, she did a test one New Year on our family. We had to do a maths test, I think, with music and without music playing. And she did it on various different members of my family. And I don't work to music at all, but it was fascinating because my responses were so much sharper and quicker when I had pop music playing than when I had silence. And other people in my family were slower with the music. They found it quite confounding. And apparently that is an indication that you're extrovert if you kind of respond well. But, I can't drive with music on because I speed. And I have done a speed awareness course recently. So I cannot drive with music on because I suddenly, I'm just going far too fast. So I think that, it's interesting, isn't it? So I think I'm more extroverted. But having said that, I was bullied in my teens, and I still feel apprehensive about, walking into a room at Harrogate or a tent at Harrogate, for instance, going up to people. So I'm, I think I'm a bit of a mix.
Yeah.
I'm an extrovert, introvert. I don't know if you can have one of the two, but it's interesting. I don't think I'm.
It's so interesting. I think it's really interesting. Okay, so Sarah, what challenge or experience, or say good or bad, in your life shaped you the most?
I think probably, I'll be positive. I think either university or motherhood, because university was such, and I can see this now that my daughter's at the same university. It's such a period of growth, and it was such a opening of my eye. I'd come from Devon. It was such an opening of my eyes to different worlds, even if I felt an outsider from those worlds. There's such a you feel like your brain is just expanding, and your experience is just expanding so much. So, and obviously to write anatomy, I drew on quite a lot of that, and motherhood has kind of threaded throughout all my books. And I feel really I wrote a Mother's Day post and then felt really uneasy because I felt I should have said, I had 5 lots of fertility treatment before I had my first child. So I know that it's, it's by no means certain. And it's very difficult to get the tone right, isn't it? And feel that you're not sort of crowing about how wonderful your experience of motherhood is, because as Little Disasters shows, I had perinatal ACD after my second baby, so it obviously wasn't completely, ideal, because motherhood never is. But I think that is probably the other single most important experience that has shaped my writing and my understanding of relationships within my writing.
Yeah.
And certainly it's based on true stories about mother and 3 daughters. And it's, I think I could have written about family anyway without that, because obviously everybody's got a mother, or has at some point had a mother. And most people, if they're not siblings, know people who are siblings. And, it's not to say that you can't write about that if you haven't experienced. Of course it's not about that. But I would say that thinking about this, motherhood is something that has threaded through. Apart from anatomy, it's threaded through all the books. So probably that and university are probably the 2, really positive things that have shaped my writing.
If you could go back to when you're 25 years old and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
I wrote it down because I wrote a couple of okay, so this is a bit of a cliche. So I wrote, my initial response was, "You are good enough," because I think I had this massive imposter syndrome, which I still have. Particularly coming out of university, where there were a lot of, as I wrote about in anatomy, there were a lot of quite entitled boys, who kind of believed they were wonderful. And I always, I think because I'd gone to read music and swapped courses, I always thought I was a bit of a fraud. And then at 25, I was starting out, I just started at The Guardian. I was at PA, and then I was at PA, so I just started at The Guardian. And I didn't, that was a broadsheet newspaper, a Fleet Street newspaper at 25. And I was kind of, I did have to go to the loo and talk to myself in that, and I listened to women like Emerald Fennell talking about Wuthering Heights. And I think how, I mean, it's money and class, isn't it? But, how come she has that innate overconfidence that I have never had? And why didn't I have that? And I would like my 25-year-old self to have that. The other thing, I've written a note, is you deserve better. Because at 25, I was going through a lot of really, men, not going through a lot of men, but, I was having a lot of, like, basically, I should have just, that was all tied in with self-worth as well. And, I just really wish, it's really interesting. I think the new gen, seeing my daughter, I think they have more understanding and self-belief, but I kind of, at 25, I didn't. And I wish I could have told myself they're all shit. Right. I shouldn't say that. But, you deserve better. I wish I wish I could have told myself that at 25. Yeah. Probably should edit that bit out.
It's fine. I get it. I get it. 100% get it. Okay. So Sarah, morning pages or midnight deadlines? So are you an early starter, or are you there working?
No, and I really wish I was. My husband's a lark and I'm more of an owl. And I know that it would be much more conducive to set an alarm really early and to be writing then. I try not to work late, because I'm trying to sort of model as well for my kids that you don't have to work all hours, especially my son, he's just doing A-levels. But if I am on deadline, I am better in somehow the quiet of, I don't, as I did as a student, I would, have essay crises to 3 a.m. I don't do that anymore. But I have, right at the bit before delivering a book, I might be working till midnight. Actually, I do find after 10 o'clock, I just can't work very well after 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
But I just, unfortunately, much as I would like to, there's something about my clock that just
It doesn't work that way.
Really hard. Although I'm waking up at 6. Well, I'm doing that perimenopausal thing of waking up at 5, and but I don't get up and write them, which maybe I should, but because I just need to sort of doze a bit and try and pretend myself turned down getting a bit more sleep. Yeah.
Okay, but you've already kind of answered this when you're writing musical silence. But
silence. But now I'm thinking maybe I should try music that hasn't got words
after doing
in
the
it.
test. Well, a lot of people
it's
on here
words
say
that's a
they
problem.
write with that. Yeah, a lot of people who do write with music on the podcast, they say it can't have words in it, so they can have the music in the background, but it's like just
So
an
I did actually
instrumental.
write some. I did write some of Reputation, and I think I wrote some based on a true story with some of the Succession theme track. Playing.
That's a good one.
So so that's sort of atmospheric, isn't it, and motivational.
Yeah.
And is it Iundo? I can't. What's the E? Is EIUNOVADO? Is it? There's some sort of orchestral, atmospheric-y type music playing there, which I've tried playing too. I've tried writing to white noise.
I can't do white noise.
I can't do that at all. So I think I might go back to trying Succession soundtrack. Yeah,
that is definitely a good one. And what is your non-writing tip for writers? I always say it can be touch grass.
Touch grass. No, it's such a cliche, but it is. Well, because I had a bad rubbish back.
Yeah.
I did a bit of Pilates. I don't do classes anymore. I do a bit of online classes, but I have to get out in the morning first thing. I've got a dog, so walking. And my new thing is that I'm trying to go out for a little walk at lunchtime as well, and I do some stretches in the evening.
Yeah.
And I also have bought a Pilates round ball because I was getting really tense shoulders, really tense shoulders. And I bought a sort of, is it a 7-inch? They're only about
I've got
£8 on Amazon.
Yeah.
And I do this thing where I lie down and I put it behind my sort of bra strap and shoulders, and you sort of, I demonstrate, it's going to look bad on YouTube, but you sort of lie back.
I do Pilates. I know exactly what you're doing.
And it's amazing for your thoracic spine. And I can hear click, 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 click. And that's my new thing I'm doing to sort of free up my thoracic spine. And I will sometimes, if my back's sore, I will just go down and do lie on the floor and do my legs from side to side, every hour or whatever when I'm making tea. And I just think I've realised that I've got to, I'm not very good at running because it kind of pounds my joints and my knee. I'm going to have to get stronger again with my Pilates again. But I do have to, I feel itchy if even before our session, I'm at my sister's. It's because of complicated reasons. I couldn't drive at night last night to get back home. And so, it's not my usual routine. I haven't walked my dog, but I just walked around the block before I did this because I was feeling really scratchy because I hadn't been out and I hadn't seen the sunshine or the rain or whatever. And so I think for writing, for mental headspace, but particularly for sitting at a desk, you've got to do some Pilates or walking. You've got to. So I walk for at least an hour a day, more than that, really. And I do some Pilates. Yeah.
I give you all of that. I mean, I only started Pilates because I have scoliosis. And my osteopath, was it my osteopath? Most people said, go and do Pilates. Yeah. So I did it. It will help with your back. And that's how I started. And I've been doing it for donkey's years. So finally, Sarah, where can listeners of the conversation find you online?
So I'm not very good on Facebook, although I am on Facebook. I think I'm Sarah Vaughan Author there. But I'm on Instagram. I'm on at Sarah Vaughan Author. So I tend to be on there. Came off Twitter when Musk said Russell Brand would be innocent of sexual assault. So I haven't been on Twitter for about, 3 years or something. So I'm not on that anymore. I do have a website, which I've just noticed I haven't put any of this on. So that's my next job, is to update it. So it's all about, but if you wanted to watch Little Disasters or Anatomy, the links are on there, and there's details of all the other books on there, and Reputation. But I am going to try to update this before it comes out next week. And that is www.sarahvaughanauthor.com. So I do have a website, and there's reading group questions on there and lots of articles. And there's even I don't do it anymore, but there's, a blog which can tell you about my early, if you go back far enough, you'll find me talking about why the Bake Off is like writing a story and, narrative in baking or something. So you'll find lots of old blogs on there if on the website. But I don't think it gets much traffic because I'm not very good at it. I'm considering doing a Substack, but I think I need to focus on the books, really.
Yeah. Oh, well, Sarah, that just leaves me to say, Sarah Vaughan, thank you so much. And really, thank you so much for being part of the conversation.
Oh, it's been lovely. Thank you. What a great conversation.
Thank you so much for watching the Conversation podcast. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you never miss a conversation. And if you'd like to catch up on more conversations, you'll find them linked on your screen now. And you can also listen to the podcast on your favourite platform. See you there. Bye.